Good morning and good afternoon. Sarah, thank you. Welcome. This is our third in a series of 8 webinars about important protests in American history at risk of being forgotten, altered, or erased. Each of these, including today's dedicated to wade-ins at Biscayne Bay, showcases the protests, issues, and people featured in the Cultural Landscape Foundation's 2024 report dedicated to sites of public demonstration. This Landslide and Action webinars are sponsored by Victor Stanley, and a big thank you to Sarah and the team. Today's featured speakers are passionate and dynamic. They will reveal amazing stories about the ordinary people who dared to shape history, how the powerless became empowered, and the places where that happened. Today, we find ourselves in a challenging moment. The backdrop for today's discussion, it's bleak. We're seeing the chipping away and elimination of critical environmental and cultural resource protections, the erasure of critical narratives and interpretation dispensed at national parks and other historic places via their websites, bookstores, and gift shops, and the interpreters and stewards who have been targeted as part of the drastic reductions to our federal and state workforces. Who will be the guardians of this irreplaceable and otherwise invisible legacy? I recently read a powerful statement by Alan Spears. Alan is a senior director of cultural resources at the National Parks and Conservation Association's Government Affairs Department. He stated, "When you start to fiddle around with history, that isn't what makes a country great. It makes us weaker. And it matters, and it makes us meaner because we're going to be much less informed about the broad sweep of US history and all of the people who have contributed to making the country a good country." Today, for the next 75 minutes, we are here to lift the veil and to celebrate the power of knowledge. To quote Malcolm X, "Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today." We're in a moment, I think, of not being prepared. We're in a moment of deferred maintenance that is requiring triage at many of our cultural resource properties, but we have to look to the future. To guide us and begin our conversation today, I'd like to turn the stage over to Kate Fleming. Kate is a founder and director of the Bridge Initiative, a nonprofit who bridges art and science to create public art for environmental advocacy. The organization came to fruition in 2015 after Kate's explorations in Antarctica led her to witness the enduring impacts of climate change. Kate's mission became to synchronize art and advocacy for a positive impact. Through her leadership, Bridge has collaborated with artists, scientists, and dare I say, disruptors to create immersive educational campaigns to highlight facets of the climate crisis within local and global environments. In her capacity as the creative community leader, she serves as an advisor for the Reef Line, an environmentally functioning artwork, artificial reef, and public park proposed to run 7 miles along Miami's beach shoreline. This project will provide a habitat for endangered reef organisms and enhance coastal resiliency through its interactive installations. Her advocacy work has led to additional ongoing partnerships with artists, designers, and environmental groups such as OMA, Coral Morphologic, Alaska Whale Foundation, National Geographic, the Everglades Foundation, the University of Miami Mission Blue, and the Cultural Landscape Foundation, where she serves on our Stewardship Council. Kate, like her father, the late Joe Fleming, is a fearless and inspiring advocate and an exemplar of being badass and leading by example. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Kate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that wonderful introduction. Um, I grew up along Biscayne Bay, and let me just share my screen. So I grew up with Biscayne Bay as my backyard, and it has inspired me to do a lot of the work that I do as a director of Bridge Initiative, which ultimately uses art for science communication and storytelling about places, ecosystems. Over the last 3 years, I have been working with an amazing team of Floridians, as well as my father, to designate Biscayne Bay as a national heritage area. Charles and the Cultural Landscape Foundation have been amazing advisors in this initiative, which will celebrate Biscayne Bay's diverse heritage, archaeological sites, and stories like the one of the Wade-ins and Virginia Key Beach. Yesterday, we submitted our report to the National Parks Department, so I'm really excited for more to come soon. In association with that, we have made a map with the artist Christina Peterson, who's also a Floridian, and that lives on our website. And it talks about all the cultural institutions and historic landmarks around Biscayne Bay, as well as biological areas of importance. And Virginia Key Beach is one of those places. I We also worked for community outreach with exhibitions that talked about all these different stories of the Bay, like the one at the Kampong back in 2023, which one of our panelists, Lonnie Johnson, did a performance piece and an artwork. And each artist kind of told their story of how Biscayne Bay has shaped their life and how it's important to them. I urge you to take a scan where you can learn more about Bridge Initiative and um, our work to put Biscayne Bay as a national heritage area. Now I'm going to pass this on to Dr. Gregory Bush, who is a historian, and we'll talk more about the rich history of Virginia Key Beach. Thank you.
Hello. I think Virginia Key Beach has been important in asserting rights to public space through the actions of African American women, the role of memory, and the diverse use of political tactics and coalitions. But it's part of a whole series of waterfront park fights that a number of us were involved in and still are. I first came to Miami in 1983 as an historian. But my interest in Virginia Key really came about after the 1990s. Early research I did on Miami history underscored what I came to see as the area as a culture of spectacle that defined so much of the waterfront from the days of Carl Fisher in the 1920s to the commercial takeovers of a lot of public waterfront in Miami by the 1990s. Parallel to that was the gross public ignorance I found of the experience of African Americans, which I gleaned from oral history interviews I conducted and from the work of Marvin Dunn and Raymond Mole, that all underscored the systematic racism and fear that defined the urban growth economy of Southeast Florida. From the 1920s on, various developmental plans took place trying to envision building manufactured islands and bridges over Biscayne Bay, etc. But notable in all of this development of tourism and everything else too, was the marginalization of African Americans in various segregated public spaces. For example, Black chauffeurs on the streets driving cars, the role of churches. Black developer Dana Dorsey had a park created on Fisher Island, but it was unsuccessful. Blacks were not allowed in Bayfront Park, but eventually several small parks were quote unquote given to African Americans in the early 20th century. Around the nation, African Americans had developed limited access to recreational spaces, only recently cataloged. Parks, playgrounds, beaches, amusement parks. If you want to learn more of some of this, you can see Andrew Carl's book, The Land Was Ours. In Miami, there were emergent yet limited forms of Black power against schools, churches, and then what not many people know about, a Garvey movement in the 1920s that attempted to take back a lot of power. But I want to focus on a couple of periods later, beginning during World War II. During that time, the Navy had trained Black seamen on the largely deserted Virginia Key Beach where some evidence also exists of use even during World War I. Negotiations during World War II were taking place between County Commissioner Charles Crandon and prominent Black lawyer Lawson Thomas, who was a follower of Mahatma Gandhi. But Crandon was dragging his bureaucratic feet. And then to push the issue, on May 9th, Thomas led a very small demonstration, a wade-in, about 6 people at Haulover Beach, quite a ways away from Virginia Key. The sheriff was there, the county sheriff, and threatened to arrest those 6 participants because African Americans were not allowed legally to swim in Biscayne Bay up until then. But Crandon, who was listening in on the way by phone, was fearful of having them arrested for fear of broader disorders impacting tourism, which I think is interesting and fits a larger pattern too. Virginia Key Beach eventually opened that August into a segregated county beach. The location was notable due to its geographic location from whites. It was also surrounded by swift currents, hence a series of tragic drownings took place for African Americans. But a bridge to the mainland was finally constructed in 1947. So at first you could only get there by boat from the Miami River. Eventually the park, as it developed, contained a carousel, overnight cabins, miniature train, food concession building, and this became a major community and religious gathering spot for Blacks in the Southeast. Music, musicians were there. Martin Luther King came on a number of occasions. It was a great place of great pride. But in this post-war era, in the late 40s and 50s, the KKK still remained a powerful force, and in league with the FBI and a lot of racist police, attempted to curb all sorts of civil rights demonstrations, reflected in attempts to get lists of the members of the NAACP, etc. I did a number of oral histories of people in regard to that. Another thing I should mention is there was a regional quality to the civil rights movement in the 1950s related to public space and beaches that's often overlooked. I did an oral history of a guy named Spencer Pompey up in Delray Beach and learned about broadcast of WTVJ in 1956 that took place that put the spotlight on segregation attempts to keep Blacks from the water up there. And it was beamed all throughout South Florida, interestingly, and showed that there was some progress because, in other words, TV brought the issue to the fore and essentially brought settlement. By the 1960s, late 50s, 60s, all the parks of Miami-Dade County, which became known later, were largely desegregated. Yet one result was that there was an erosion of community gatherings and identity at Virginia Key Beach. I interviewed one gentleman who was ashamed of the role of Virginia Key because he thought it was segregated. And what I also came to see, as others did, was lost memories. People could go to any park, so Virginia Key lost its centrality. Another era began in 1982 when Miami-Dade County transferred Virginia Key Beach to the city of Miami. Shortly thereafter, the city closed the park down, and we learned from research that the county failed to follow its own deed restrictions, which had mandated that it be open. It remained largely closed and unused until the late 1990s, when a whole series of waterfront issues congealed with developmental interests in multiple waterfront locations. Up until this time, there's Dan Paul, been a brilliant attorney who had stood up for the waterfront. But by the late 1990s, the Urban Environment League and other organizations came to the fore. I was director of the Institute for Public History at the time at the University of Miami, and became involved as an activist in founding the UEL, first formed in 1996 against the Miami Heat takeover of largely unused waterfront land. I started studying aspects of public history and public space in Miami with the help of City Park Director Albert Reuter. I later wrote enabling legislation and lobbied to create the city's Parks Advisory Board, as well as the Virginia Key Advisory Board. Then in early 1999, simultaneous with activities surrounding the Miami Circle, the archaeological site, an all-white city task force had been formed to come up with a development plan or redevelopment plan for Virginia Key. Virginia Key Beach soon became a unique struggle in terms of environmental and public space advocacy based on memories of its past as an African-American beach. Longtime activist, environmental activist Mabel Miller had gotten me involved in the issue after I became president of the UEM, and I also read and reviewed Marvin Dunn's book, Black Miami. Thus, to me, it was part, pardon me, of a larger set of commercial forces threatening waterfront parks, further marginalizing the Black community. The Marlins' desire for a stadium in Bicentennial Park also loomed. All these needed a variety of strategies and tactics. From the first meeting I attended in February, I think it was, 1999, on Virginia Key, I heard environmental activists decrying the city's clever insider plans for commercialization of Virginia Key. My contribution, in one sense, was to shift the political focus onto Virginia Key as a unique space of memory for the Black community. One gentleman on the panel said, "Oh, well, we'll give him the Black." But I said, and others did too, that this park needed to be preserved and reopened as an African-American historic spot. I was in particular aided by the work of Bob Weinreb and Nancy Lee, who had been following this and had a box of documents. Earlier, I'd also met Jean Tinney, artist and historic preservationist Enid Pinckney at the Miami Circle, and we knew that the Virginia Key effort in the future had to be led by African Americans. And we talked to Black community leader Athley Range and got her involved in leading it, as well as Tinney, Pinckney, and Lawson Thomas's widow, Eugenia Thomas, was involved. We fused oral history, community memories, and the preservation of public space, all aided by what I came to see as the unique role of women in the effort, far more than men, interestingly, as well as the real political power of City Commissioner Arthur Teal. We developed strategy of protest, advocacy for new planning efforts that went parallel to regular Tuesday evening protests to save the Tequesta site at the Miami Circle. Later, there were Urban Environment League walks of renewal that kept Bicentennial Park from becoming home of the Florida Marlins. In the coming years, our coalition held a charrette design workshop, if you will. The city created the Virginia Key Park Trust, led by Athley Range and Jean Tinney. Then an island-wide charrette took place, seeking to link various island properties because it was largely uninhabited at that time, other than in the Marine Stadium, which had been let to go to seed, if you will. So in 2008, the park finally opened as the historic Virginia Key Park. But as I would like to end here is that the struggle is never open. I was asked by the National Park Service to assess the value of the park in a written document as a potential national park. I did so, but sadly, they decided it was not historically significant enough, something I strongly disagreed with at that point. Virginia Key Beach Trust continues, as does the Virginia Key Advisory Board. And I retired from teaching and moved to the Maine coast where I live now. Recent attempts by the city to commercialize the park continue. The conclusion is that I reach is that public space issues in this nation are threatened as never before and need new champions and tactics, and you need to know the history. Final comment, John Pennekamp said in 1947, important writer, next to the sun, the waters of the ocean and the bay are the greatest assets we have. In fact, they are inseparable in evaluating the area's primary worth. The people's right to see and enjoy the waters certainly transcends that of any developer who, lacking a civic consciousness and pride, would ride roughshod to his purpose. Thank you very much.
Okay, up next we have Athlete Edwards.
Hey, I just had a dog walk in on me, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Greg. That was wonderful how you were able to give the history on the park and in your involvement, and we appreciate everything that you do and continue to do. And we love your story in your book that you wrote recently, so we appreciate that. My name is Athlete Edwards. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of Historic Virginia Key Beach, which is managed by Virginia Key Beach Park Trust. I bring 18 years of experience from construction, project management, strategic planning, and civic leadership, with 10 years dedicated to public administration. I hold an undergrad in emergency management and a master's in public administration, and I'm deeply committed to preserving the history of Historic Virginia Key Beach Park and honoring the powerful civil rights legacy and Miami's Black history as well. I also would like to thank the Cultural Foundation for having us and bringing awareness to the park as well. Next slide, please. So in 1986, the city of Miami was incorporated. For those who don't know, it took 162 Black men to help incorporate the city of Miami. We did a story here with Black Profiles in Miami through a lunch and learn to bring awareness to that as well. Later on in the same year, in 1986, there was Plessy versus Ferguson, which we all know that doctrine ruled separate but equal. But as Mr. Bush stated, we were not treated equals as African Americans. We had no place to recreate. The schools that they did have African Americans going to were subpar to the white schools, and sanitation in African American communities were subpar as well. So our conditions were not equal to those of the white individuals. By the 1930s, African Americans made up 31% of Miami's population. However, they were barred from accessing any of the beaches that were available to the public. Next slide, please. So in May 9th of 1945, Mr. Lawson Thomas, which is pictured on the bottom right-hand corner, organized a group of individuals with Black men and one Black female to do a wade-in at Baker's Haulover, which is also known as Haulover Park now. It was an all-white segregated beach. With challenging the white beach, they wanted to make sure that they brought awareness to the Black beach, to us not having a Black beach. At that time, Mr. Lawson had $500 in hand to make sure that if anyone were to go to jail, that he would be able to bail them out right away. But they stood their right in the wait-in, and there was an officer by the name of Sheriff D.C. Coleman that contacted Commissioner Charles Crandon, who later had a discussion with Mr. Thomas to make sure that they could have a place later on. On the left-hand side, we have a quote from Eugenia Thomas, which was the husband of Lawson Thomas, which states, "One doesn't always sense the historic nature of an event as it unfolds. And then years from now, we see that the history and that it should have been recorded as it happens because it's going to become important." So although she was not there, she's giving how she felt about the aspect of what her husband was doing for the greater of the Black community. On the top left-hand corner, you can see that there was coverage as well from Miami Herald, and we also have coverage as well from the Miami Times. Next slide, please. So the different advocates that took a part of the protest wait-in included Lawson Thomas, who was the first Black judge, who was an attorney at the time, but later became a judge. We have Otis Mundy, who was a grocer from Overtown. We have Mae Brand, which was a community leader, civil rights activist, and businesswoman. We have Mary Hay Sweetie, who actually was the only woman that took place in that protest, and she's the one that helped raise the $500 bail money just in case. We have Judge Henderson, who was the first of the Miami Union International Longshore Association, who actually is the one that got in contact with the Miami-Dade County Sheriff Office to let them know that this was going to take place. Oh, Mr. Tinney is here. I'm happy that you're here, Mr. Tinney. Thank you for joining us. Number 6, we have John Hill, which was one of the U.S. Navy soldiers. And we have one more individual, which was an unnamed U.S. Navy sailor, who were actually trying to get in his information as well. So, Mr. Bush, if you could help us with that, we'd greatly appreciate it. So on the left, you have a photo of George Henderson, and on the right, you have a picture of Reverend Gibson from the Black Archives as well. Next slide, please. So a couple months after that waiting took place and through the conversation that Mr. Thomas had with Commissioner Crandon, the birth of Historic Virginia Key Beach took place on August 1st. At the time, there was no causeway. It was only accessible by boat. On the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a photo of the docks for the boats. Next to that photo, you can see the picture that says Dade County Parks, Virginia Beach, colored only. And then on the left-hand side, you can see that the bathhouse that was there, which we currently still have today, and the concession stand that we currently still have today. And then on the top, you can see a picture of our shoreline. So we are designated as historic, as Mr. Bush referenced, and we still have different areas of the park that are original, like our concession stand, our bathhouse, and our dance floor. Next slide, please. So Virginia Key Beach is cherished. We had some notable figures like Muhammad Ali, James Brown, Dr. Martin Luther King and his family that would frequent the beach. During the civil rights movement, it was just a power of Black individuals that just kept this place alive. In 1959, Reverend Theodore Gibson led a peaceful demonstration at the segregated Crandon Park, which led to eventually them integrating the park. So on the right-hand side, you can see the Miami Times article. You can see next to that a picture of them in the concession stand that we currently still have today. Next to that, on the left-hand side, you'll see a photo of them having a praise and worship or a baptismal at the park, in the water, at the beach. And then you have the historic dance floor, which we currently still have here today, and the photo listed on the top left-hand corner. Next slide, please. So what we have here is a photo of when we were able to reopen the park. As Mr. Bush referenced, the park sat dormant for years. Athlete Range organized a task force, which included herself, Athlete Range, Eugenia Thomas, Mark Walters, Jean Timmy, which is on the call today, Maud Newbold, Richard Dick Thompson, and Dr. Enid Pickney. These individuals were working steadily with the community, with the government, to make sure that this park reopened and had a new grand opening. They also worked with the Pioneer Athlete Range, who dedicated her life to making sure that African Americans had good sanitation in their areas, good schools for them to attend. And she worked diligently to make sure that she could work with the task force and individuals like Mr. Teeny to make sure that we could open up and reopen the park. Today, we're still open. We pride ourselves on community engagement, and we turned 80 this year. So next slide, please, as I wrap up. So on Friday, August 1st, is our 80th anniversary. It's From Coastlines to Community, A Legacy in the Sands. We have inner city areas like Liberty City, Colortown, also known as Overtown, Lemon City, also known as Little Haiti, Brownsville, Coconut Grove, and Richmond Heights. that had to go ahead and travel from inland all the way to Virginia Key Beach just to recreate. So if you're familiar with Miami, you know that these areas are scattered and nowhere close to the water. So our goal is to make sure that we work through the community to bring the community into our coastline to continue to recreate and use the park as it was designed. Through our education department, we also do work with environmental scientists. We use this area as a scientist playground. We also go into the community, go into schools to do on-site field trips, service-based learning, working with Miami-Dade College and Berry College to make sure that we can continue to provide this site for individuals to get additional curriculum on their books. We also do community outreach, public outreaches. We have humanities with oral stories with Miami-Dade County, in entrepreneurship groups as well, and science groups that continue to work with us to test our wildlife and our waters here. Right now, we're just looking for support from the community. We're looking for individuals to continue to help us preserve our history and preserve our space. So thank you again. My name is Athley Edwards. I'm the executive director and the CEO. And I just love what I do, and I'm happy to be here.
Great,
Awesome.
thank you so much.
So, my name is Lonnie Johnson, born and raised here in Miami. I consider myself a multidisciplinary artist. And what I want to kind of concentrate on today is 3 activations that were connected to bodies of water here in Miami. And as an artist, I feel like it's our obligation to kind of use our craft to protect and preserve these stories, specifically for me, these Black Miami stories. So with this first activation, I was invited to participate in the bridge destruction site created by the amazing colleague of mine, Misael Soto. And I had an activation called 531 Sundown Procession, where I led a procession from the actual shoreline on Miami Beach, about 10th Street, and was thinking a lot about the domestic workers on Miami Beach and how Miami Beach is, and I say is, a sundown town, and how historically Black folks have a certain feeling about being on Miami Beach. So I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this activation. So I led the procession off of the beach down to where the Wilsonian Museum is. And inside of the museum, I had a wall of speakers. And at the foot of the wall of the speakers, I had an ancestor altar. And the reason why I have been incorporating altars and this speaker wall into my works recently is because I feel like these 2 entities do the same thing. They call and response, they honor, they acknowledge, and create a space for Black people to feel safe and seen. These were the shoes that I wore during the procession. And if you look closely, they had rubbed blisters on the back of my ankles. And it really made me, again, think about all of these domestic workers that day in and day out have to grind and walk sometimes blocks, maybe miles, to get to and from the bus that goes to the hotel or the restaurant that they work at, and then have to repeat that process to go home. So then that led me to create another activation during the Theorizing Blackness workshop day that was created by the Center of Global Black Studies at University of Miami and Commissioner. And it was in response to this idea of the sundown town in Miami Beach, and then using Virginia Key as this place of refuge for Black people. So it was rooted more in how we connect to water for recreation, for healing, for reflection. So then that led me to my activation during Untitled during Art Miami Week. And I really wanted to kind of disrupt the space and disrupt the fair in this idea of, again, being on Miami Beach, being in this Black body, and what that meant to be in that space. Because a lot of times people forget during Miami Art Week that folks are here before, during, and after this art fair. Excuse me. And as a Black woman, as a Black artist, I just felt the need to claim space in this way. So the activation started within the fair, and I led the procession outside to, again, the audience to meet the wall of speakers and altar. And we had a block party. And I think that it was really rooted in Black and brown joy, Black celebration, and again, providing accessibility to a community of folks that would not have necessarily come to Untitled or come to Miami Beach during this time. So again, I feel like my art is a way to create an entry point for communities that are not necessarily considered to be included in some of these spaces, especially in these art spaces. So it's important for me as an artist to use my craft to do that, and to also use it to make sure that these stories, these folks aren't forgotten. Thank you.
Deja, I think you're muted.
Thank you. We've been doing this online thing for how many years now, and I still forget to unmute. I was just saying thank you so much, Lonnie. Those images are incredibly powerful, and I think we can feel them so viscerally. I think one of the questions that today's discussion brings up is what can the waterways and how we treat the environment tell us about race, about class, about patterns of migration? What does it tell us about us as a society? In Mr. Gregory Bush's book, White Sand, Black Beach, I'm struck by how often the absence of surveillance is mentioned. In several accounts, we hear him talk about how, a person he's interviewing would say there was only one police person and everybody knew him. All of these people, all of these Black bodies enjoying themselves in the water, coming for spiritual and joyful and celebratory connection. And there was only ever one policeman. And to me, this really uplifts the role of Black space or geographies as a place of refuge, free from the gaze of the state. Here, Black space becomes a space for building new worlds, for building forward, and also for imagination. I think also, the work of Ms. Athalie Edwards, whose presentation I truly appreciated, uplifts Black imagination and self-determination as well. I had the opportunity to go to the visitor center, which I highly, highly, highly recommend for all of you to do. I sat in on an incredible presentation, and it really helped ground me in the history of the beach. It's as if you could feel the power of the place and the power of memory kind of culminating in that moment.
all you have to do is look toward the horizon and think about how many people were there and could only be there because it was the only place they were allowed to be. And how many of those folks, just in their very presence and existence, were creating a place of resistance. That quote, "One doesn't always sense the historic nature of an event as it unfolds," to me sounds very much like an invitation to us all in the now, and to start thinking a little bit more deeply about how we want to be remembered and what our role will be, whatever it is, in building toward the future. I think Kate's work with Bridge Initiative and Lonnie's work as a multidisciplinary artist also shows us that we need new strategies for advocacy and for communicating change. I think art provides us with this additional vocabulary that you don't see necessarily in the political stage or on the organizing space. And art to me is interwoven into everything. As a strategy, Lonnie's practice is particularly striking because her work embodies the history. And when I say embody, you see the physicality of it. I don't know how many of you saw those shoes and thought of your grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, maybe your mother, maybe you're in that same scenario right now. And so this idea of truly embodying and conjuring is so important to bringing the urgency into the space through the movement, memory. We're called into alignment with our ancestors. And for me, that's a collapsing of time, which is really important as we imagine forward. I think this kind of claiming puts us in dialogue with Enid Pinckney, Lawson Thomas, and it puts us in dialogue with the work of Gene Tinney, who's been mentioned several times on this call because his work has been so incredibly instrumental in getting us here. We have heroes and champions in our very community who tell us what we need to know to build forward. And so in these times when it feels particularly hopeless, I don't know if y'all feel that way sometimes, but when it feels particularly defeating, we know people here in our community have gone through this before. And in reaching out to them and finding new ways for collaboration, there's an opportunity for us to create this kind of generational knowledge. So the big takeaway for me has been the invitation to participate however you can, in whatever way you feel most capable and able, to move this agenda of equity, of justice, and really of liberation and world building forward. We got an invitation today to celebrate Virginia Key's 80th anniversary. Be going to that. We got an invitation to support Bridge Initiative. We should do that. And of course, we should support the work of Lonnie Johnson and Gregory Bush. Feeling very grateful to be in the room with such giants today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deja, and all of you all had so much amazing history and thoughts to share on Virginia Key Beach. I was just thinking, Deja, when you were speaking about Toni Cade Bambara's quote, "Art's job is to make the revolution irresistible." I also think about that when I think about Lonnie's work. And Deja, I know Commissioner supports new models of art collecting. How can artists help preserve the memory of protest landscapes? And how do collectors play a role in this, you think, going forward?
That's a great question, Kate. I think that often when we think about collecting art, we're thinking about the acquisition of objects. But that really puts it in a very narrow framework. When we're thinking about collecting art, really what we're saying is there's an opportunity to step into our role as cultural stewards. We can't allow institutions to be the sole tellers of our stories. They play such an important role, but all of these stories need to exist in our living rooms, near our kitchen tables, in all of our domestic spaces. And the more we could think about collecting art as memory making and as memory work, it means, right, that we are creating or preserving the artifacts of our communities and ensuring that these stories are going to be carried on from generation to generation. So I think really important for all of us is to think about how we can decentralize memory so that there's a plurality of stories, as many stories as possible, and that these stories thrive in our communities.
Beautiful, thank you. And Lonnie, do you have any thoughts on that quote by Tony Kane Barr, or anything to add to what Deja said, and how your artwork could play a role in that?
I mean, I think again, like I said in my presentation, it's as artists, it's a part of our practice to be the storytellers, the preservers of history, and to acknowledge and nurture these stories. Like I stated before, it's sad that here in Miami there is an erasure that is happening of certain Black Miami stories. And I think that as artists, it's only right for us to take the stance and kind of like seize the moment to create space for these stories. And it's important because when I'm gone, I'm hoping that someone can see my work and be reminded of what Miami is, or what a Black woman's story in Miami and beyond is. So art lives beyond us. So it's important for us to understand that and take the time to be intentional about the messagings that we are presenting through our work.
I totally agree. Ashley, I was wondering, what are the current efforts to preserve and interpret Virginia Key Beach, and how can people get involved in the Trust's work as your 80th anniversary comes up?
Thanks, Kate. So through the education department, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on scaling our outreach, our information from as young as VPK to as old as collecting oral stories from seniors. We're also working with Miami-Dade County Social Studies Division to make sure that our information is included in their social studies curriculum. We know what today's political climate and African American studies, they're trying to remove some of that information, but we're working with the teachers to show them how to check that box as it pertains to studies itself. We want to make sure that we're also working with, other organizations to make sure that the ecological aspect provides a scientist playground here. We want to make sure that everybody that aligns with our mission and our vision knows that we're here, we're telling our story, we're including individuals like the Canadian consulate. They come down and they learn about our stories as well. One of our vendors that do horseback riding, we make sure that every tour that they're on, they're teaching individuals about the Black history, the Black Miami history of historic Virginia Key Beach. So partnerships is something that's really important to us. We also try to get donations if anyone's doing like a beach cleanup, whether it's like a large scale company like Belgarvey or Louis Vuitton or any of those really high-end brands. We make sure that they're not just checking the box. We educate them and we ask them to donate. So we're on social media, Historic Virginia Key Beach Park. We're on LinkedIn. We ask for donations as well to kind of keep our story going and to kind of make sure that we can preserve our history, our Black history, our Miami history, and not just the preservation part of the land, but the preservation part of the history. So that's how we work on making sure that we're out in the public.
That's great.
And I'm
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have to say it one more time. Friday, August the 1st, this Friday, we're having our 80th celebration, light bites, music, spoken word. We just want to make sure that we bring awareness to our 80th birthday. It's a free event. Entry is free. Come onto the park, get some history, get some fun in the sun.
Thank you. We hope to all be there. Gregory Bush, I was wondering, Virginia Key and other protest landscapes, do you feel that they're adequately protected under the historic designation? And what can be done to further protect these places of protest and places, especially during the current administration? If you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I honestly think that Virginia Key Beach should be part of either Biscayne National Park or along with the Miami Circle and several other locations should be its own national park or heritage site. It should have more formal designation, and appreciate that. I guess here's my view. Protests were central, as we know, in creating the protests and central in creating the park in 1945. Yet we also need to recall that there were negotiations between Lawson Thomas and Charles Crandon. So there were a lot of background factors that need to be understood. And I think that understanding kind of the, not surprisingly, because I'm a historian, the history of the politics of all this is critically important. Not just art, but really understanding the complexity of all that has taken place is critically important in order to keep it as a sacred place, if you will.
Hey, Kate, I'm going to jump in on this one also because I think one of the challenges we often have when it comes to historic resources is that the lenses, plural, that we've been talking about today were not front lobal in 1945 when the park was designated. And I think the important thing is that it's been more than 50 years since many of these events have taken place. Thereby, they are eligible for designation or an expansion of any designation in their own right. And so, one of the things that we have to also focus on is local recognitions, because that's where the teeth lie. I mean, as we're having this conversation right now, a number of the federal regulatory tools that we have to protect our resources are at risk, whether it's NEPA or Section 106. And so we need a broad lens, and that lens has to be lifted up by the broadest coalition possible. And if we're going to try to tell these stories, we have to get those baked into the areas of significance that these properties are associated with. And I just want to say thank you to everybody today as well, personally, for such a moving and eye-opening presentation. I think it's very easy when we move through places, especially places that are imbued with such beauty, that it is easy to miss the greater narratives and lifeways that are right there, that we are walking in those footsteps. And so to amplify the voices that have already said this, the more we tell the stories, the more we serve as kin keepers for next gens, the more that we put ourselves into those stories as part of those cultural lifeways and forge those connections, then these places will endure. So it is a top-down and bottom-up approach to protecting and preserving place.
Beautiful. Well said, Charles. I just want to also see if anyone in the audience has any questions and open it up. I don't know where the Q&A.
Kate, while we're waiting for those, I'm going to ask a question of all the
Please.
panelists, because I think this is really important. Where do you find hope today when we're talking about a place like this?
Well, we find hope in the people. Is really like word of mouth. Just how it was back in the day, they had the Green Book or the Underground Railroad, if you want to go all the way back. It's really in the culture of folk tales, people telling their stories. I told my staff I wasn't going to tell the story today, but I just have to. Like, my stepdad grew up in Alapata. Back then they had nowhere to recreate. So just by him telling me how him, his brother, his mom, his dad, they all piled in their car, came over to Virginia Keys. Some people had to get here by boat. So it's just sometimes hearing those stories through the people just not stopping, being passionate, partnerships. Lonnie, we've reached out to you trying to get something here going, live in museums, like just having that passion, that fire, the work that you do, Charles, the work that you do, Mr. Bush, like continuing to be advocates for our story, our Black history, our mission, our vision. That's the only way it's going to happen, because if all of it goes away and there's no money to fund us, we still have those stories inside of us. So telling someone, teaching someone, getting, involved in partnerships, we're stronger together, things like that, I think is definitely going to help us. But getting those state representatives involved too, having them advocate for us, having them help fund certain things that we need. When it's Black Miami Art Week, getting people to come to our park, the Black Beach, telling our story, bringing awareness. So for us, I think that's how it would work for us.
If I can add, I also think that there really needs to be more attention on Miami history. You don't have it much in the curriculum in Miami-Dade County. You don't have much Florida history really that's taught. And I think that's a big, big problem because people need to appreciate the political complexity and the power of what they can do. There's so many positive examples, and yet we do live in a very, very dark time. If I can read one very short quote from Lawson Thomas, I think you might appreciate it. He said, "We cannot stand a national light to the world for freedom and from fear, with part of our citizens parading in bed sheets by the dark of night and burning crosses before the humble homes of their Black fellow citizens who seek expansion into new, decent, and clean places to live. Racial intolerance and segregation are sapping the moral fiber and killing the soul of the American people, thus leaving us unfit to assume the leadership of a world in which most of the people are other than white." Now, that was back in 1947. And I think we're still living with those words of importance.
I run an organization called Commissioner here in Miami. And so, Charles, in response to your question around what gives me hope, it's a collaboratively funded organization. In other words, if people don't show up and support it, it ceases to exist. And every year, people show up and we pool our funds together to commission artists, including Lonnie Johnson, to create work, which for us advances this idea of collecting as memory. So the fact that folks keep on showing up, they keep on saying yes, they want to volunteer, they find different ways to connect with each other outside of the program. It's really what Athley said. People care. We just need to be, I shouldn't say we just need to be. I enjoy and I am hopeful for more spaces that welcome this kind of participation.
I agree. I think it's working, growing up on Biscayne Bay and then working on creating a national heritage area with folks like you all and a broader group has really given me hope and knowledge. I grew up here in South Florida, and much of the research we did in order to, learn about Biscayne Bay and do these feasibility reports for our national heritage area, I never learned in school. And so I think that doing these things which will recognize the Bay and then be able to fund organizations like Virginia Key Beach and other educational programs, as well as preserve the cultural history and the archaeological sites on the Bay, which there's so many, and it's something that so few people know about or learn about, and it's almost a secret because developers want to continue developing in these places, not only in Virginia Key, but also on ancient Tequesta burial sites. And the idea of keeping this alive and educating more people, I know will inspire more people to protect it. So I think education and community gives me hope.
And to your point, Kate, we had the same issue where they wanted to bring a homeless encampment here. The people spoke out. And we thank the city of Miami for enforcing 23B or creating 23B, an ordinance that stopped development on this park with the exception of the museum. So it's things like that, getting the people to rally around. If there's a green space, a space that you want to preserve, the best thing to use is your voice. Talk to your commissioners, express what it is that you want to see there, and they will work because it's the people's area. You vote your commissioners in, so the conversation is between the people and the government. But we're only as strong as our bodies, so we just have to use our voices.
Beautifully said. I see that there's a question here from the audience from Sarah Evans asking about the symbolism of Lonnie's dress as a bride in the work she showcased. It's very beautiful. Is there anything that you want to add about like what you were wearing, Lonnie, and how that was symbolic to the work that you were doing?
Sure. It's not a bride. I wear white traditionally in a lot of ceremonial as African spiritualities and African American hoodoo when they conduct ceremonies or ritual, they wear white. So white is kind of like this idea of rebirth. It's this idea of cleansing. It's an idea of transcendence. And the veil, there's a saying used in African American hoodoo that if you're born with the veil, you're able to see the other side. Because apparently my mom was born with the veil, and it's an ability to be able to see and connect with your ancestors in a way that others can't. So it's me physically wearing a veil so I can connect to acknowledge the ancestors. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
But the bride is interesting. I've never got that.
A bride to the ancestors. Are there any other questions, or Charles, is there anything else that you want to add? I don't know how we're doing with time here.
I think we're doing great. I guess what I want to do is just, for me, in terms of conclude with an open invitation. We've heard about the import of collaboration and working together. I hope that all of our speakers and anyone who's in attendance today considers TCLF an opportunity to communicate with a larger international audience. I can see looking in the Zoom room and some of the comments that we have people from even the UK with us today in academia. So we have a very broad audience. If you get our monthly communications, which you should if you're signed up for this going forward, we communicate with almost 38,000 monthly in our e-letters. We would love to promote the work that this group, collective, if you will, continues to do. Please consider us your home and your partner. And I just want to again thank everyone for uplifting us today and for me giving me a lot of hope and optimism, because I think that the more that we continue to amplify these voices, which is happening, the better chance for stewardship and interpretation for broader populations that will follow. And Kate, maybe if you have some closing thoughts as the moderator. And also, is there anything, knowing that the heritage area proposals or the designation proposals are now advancing, are there anything here today that people can do to support that, to write letters of support? Because those sorts of things do make a difference.
Yes, thank you, Charles. It would be great, number one, to have letters of support from all of you that are sitting on this panel for the National Heritage Area, and anyone in the audience that wants to learn more, you can go to bridgeinitiative.org. I'll put that in the chat as well, and send a letter of support. The email's there. There's also a whole site designated to Biscayne Bay, which includes places like Virginia Key Beach, as well as so many more. And if we, this now needs to go to Congress, so it's going to be a long march, but hopefully this will be something that they support, and then it would really uplift all of these stories and all these locations in sight, and really connect the Bay so that it's not a national park, it's a preserve. There's different heritage, there's different areas that are protected, but connect it all, because Biscayne Bay is really the connecting tissue of Dade County, and it is the waterway that unites all these different sites, all these different communities and people together. So putting it underneath a National Heritage Area will hopefully broaden the storytelling and the connections that everybody has to the Bay and to each other.
Wonderful. Anything from Victor Stanley in terms of closing, housekeeping?
I think if I can post the quiz link again, we'll get those out probably in about a week or so. And this webinar will be available on our website under the Learning tab, and then on the TCLF YouTube channel as well.
Sarah and the Victor Stanley team, thank you. To Kate, our moderator, to all of our speakers, thank you for today. And we look forward to staying abreast of the developments, and have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
So much, you all. Thanks for the invite, Charles.